Chapter 1. Blood Without Hunger. They do not cast long shadows at noon. They do not hiss at crucifixes or shriek at garlic cloves. They drink blood, yes, but only the way a tired soul drinks wine, for warmth, for memory, for the tremor it sends through the body, not for life itself. Higher vampires are not what the old songs swear they are. This is the first thing to understand, and perhaps the last. If you hold fast to the tavern tales, undead ghouls crouching beneath eaves, pale things seared by sunlight, you will never see them for what they are. You will hunt ghosts and strike at darkness while the true creature sits across from you at the table, asking if you prefer your wine dry or sweet, a touch of blackberry, a whisper of smoke. They are alive. Not as we are, not bound to the slow, stubborn cadence of the human heart. Their existence is a long, lucid dream. They remember cities that stood before our grandfathers' grandfathers kindled their first hearth fires. They remember winters with different stars. They remember the night the worlds touched, the conjunction, when thread met needle and the fabric of reality puckered, leaving stray stitches that never lay flat again. Through those snags came many things. Some skittered, some howled, a few learned to speak, and a very small number listened. The ones who listened learned our languages. The ones who listened learned our manners. The ones who listened learned that hunters who set their traps at dusk often forget to look up. You do not hunt a higher vampire with silver and shouting. You meet them with a story and a chair. If they sit, you are already inside their courtesy. If they smile, truly smile, you are already inside their patience. And yet, for all their polish, there is a moment, there is always a moment, when the surface ripples and you glimpse what lies beneath. It is not a beast, the word is wrong. Beasts are simple. This is older, wiser, hungrier in a way that has nothing to do with blood. In an abandoned chapel swallowed by ivy, I once saw tracks that did not belong to any beast I knew. Light, careful, as if a dancer had crossed the dust on the balls of their feet. The place had no roof. The moon peered down like a white coin forgotten in a black purse. Between the broken pews lay a scattering of feathers, unburnt but brittle, and a wine stain old as grief. On the altar, a cracked chalice. An old story then. The villagers had chased something here years ago. Torches, pitchforks, fear, and the thing had fled into mist. The villagers told me it was a demon. Then they swore it was a witch, then a devil, then they shrugged, and the children were told to be home by dusk, and no one rang the bell anymore. You learn to read a place the way a surgeon reads a pulse. The stone remembers. The soot remembers. The dust remembers. The villagers had only fear. The chapel whispered something else. Care. That careful tread. The wine poured and never finished. The chalice placed back on the altar, not thrown. I left a candle and a coin and a bottle not of wine, but of patience. It was late, and the road was long, and I was old enough to admit I would rather share a table than a fight. When the candle had tunneled halfway and the cold had settled into the bones of the building, he arrived. Not with a rustle, not with a chill, simply there, as one is when one has always been. He looked like a gentleman who had forgotten his century, a dark coat, a collar half a generation out of fashion, hands that did not fidget. He glanced at the chalice, at the candle, at the coin, and smiled as if I had committed a small kindness. When he spoke, his voice carried that soft dryness you hear from men who have read far too many books alone. "You did not bring garlic," he said. "It spoils the wine," I answered. He inclined his head at that, as if I had passed a modest test. "Do you know what they call us?" "Many things," I said. "They call us dead," he said, amused. "And here we are discussing onions." We sat. Always the table, always the ritual. The bottle was uncorked. The first pour went to the dust, a toast to whatever had stood here before. The second to him. The third to the night. He drank as a man drinks. Bitter first, then warmer. No theatrics, no hiss. The candle leaned closer, curious. "Does your heart beat?" I asked. Too blunt, perhaps? "When it needs to," he said. "It is an instrument, not a metronome." "And blood?" He twirled the wine, watching the legs slowly paint the glass. "Blood is a hobby, a remembrance. To your kind, it is a demand. To mine, a choice. Like music, like the sea." He looked at me then, as if to see whether I would flinch. "The old tales make us drunkards. They are not wrong. I have seen mortals drown themselves in grain and grape. I have drowned myself in red. It is a vice, not a vein." A vice, not a vein. I remembered a different voice, another of his kind, once a barber surgeon, who had described his own fall with that same mixture of candor and shame. How he had sworn off the cup, not because it killed him, it could not, but because it unmade him. How he had returned to himself the way a man returns to a language he learned as a boy and forgot during a long siege. "You call yourself people," I said at last, not as a challenge, but as a map. "We are people," he said gently. "We are simply not yours. The old weapons do not hold against them. Steel is an irritation. Silver, a discourtesy. Sunlight is a nuisance, not a noose. They walk in daylight because it pleases them to be mistaken for what they are not. Crosses mean little to a species that does not share our history of fear. Holy water is only water made nervous. If you believe these things can save you, you will die surprised, which is not the worst way to go, but it is not a plan. What hurts them? Fire sometimes, if they let it. Another of their kind, if they choose it. The truth is more unsettling. The higher vampire you can kill is a higher vampire who has decided you may. That is the shape of it, not invulnerability, will. I have seen one of them decapitated by a mob mad with harvest ale and jealousy. Years later, he rose from the soil whole, hair full of roots like ribbons, eyes wet with the memory of sleeping. He brushed the dirt from his coat and walked to the nearest village to ask politely for work. He mended bodies and brewed tonics and learned the names of dogs. No one thought him a monster because kindness is a better disguise than shadow. He joked later that his death had been a kind of bath, humbling and good for the circulation. Do not mistake this for harmlessness. A higher vampire's courtesy is a sheet over a well. They prefer to be clean, but deep is deep whether you cover it or not. If one of them decides to pull the sheet, you will learn how long a scream can last. Yet they do not go on rampage by nature. Their nature is cultured. Even the wild ones measure their rage with taste. They can turn to something like a bat. Yes, if drama calls for it. They can turn to mist if a door feels vulgar. They can hear a lie in your teeth and taste fear the way a chef tastes salt. A pinch more, perhaps, to bring the dish to life. They can speak mind to mind, or so those who have survived them swear, though it may simply be that a mind in the presence of a will that all longs to be read and relieved of its choices. And still, blood without hunger. This matters. Because it means what binds them to us is not need, but decision. A need excuses, a decision reveals. You came, I said to the gentleman with the candlelight eyes, because I left wine. I came, he said, because you left patience. He studied the broken icon on the wall, the way Ivy had traced a second halo around the faded paint. Your species confuses hunger and want. It makes your stories clear and your wars confusing. And you, I asked. I confuse nothing, he said, and sipped. Which is why I do not rule you. To rule is to partake in your confusions. To live beside is to watch them pass like weather. He set the cup down and the chapel listened. Your kind sings of us as if we were thieves, he went on softly, taking what is not ours. But most of what we take you pour, the jealousies, the cruelties, the empty rooms you lock inside your own heads. We do not invent those, we harvest, we prefer the fruit ripe. Predators, I said. Gardeners, he corrected, on a different calendar. And hunters, I asked, thinking of the feathers, the brittle silence shaped like an old scream. He did not answer for a time. When he did, there was no coyness in it. Sometimes, he admitted, there are moments when want pretends to be need and you let it. Those are my worst nights. His gaze strayed to the chalice, to the place where long ago the villagers had drawn a line and then crossed it shaking. Once, he said, I fell very far. I believed the tale they told of me. I became it. I drank until the world had only one color. I woke later, taught myself again. The hardest lesson is always the same. What lesson? I asked. That to be what you are does not excuse what you do. He lifted the cup briefly as if to toast the sentence, then did not drink. Your kind has a saying, he added. We borrow it. Know thyself. It is poor advice at the start and excellent at the end. Is this the end? I asked. For you. He smiled. No. For me, also no. That is the trouble between us. Here is another correction to the ballads. Witchers do not hunt higher vampires as one hunts drowners or wolves. They negotiate with them the way weather is negotiated, with doors and roofs and prudent roots. A witcher will take a contract, yes, and the posting will carry the familiar stains, crimson fingerprints, desperate script, a sum that promises too much to pay for too little sleep. But the seasoned ones ask questions first. Whose cattle? Who's missing? Whose rumor? Whose rival? Often the vampire is not the blood on the blade, but the shadow behind the coin. And sometimes this is not sung in the inns either. The witcher and the vampire share a fire and a thin blanket of civility. The witcher speaks of steel and signs. The vampire speaks of restraint as an art. The two clink bottles and drink to the moon that makes everyone foolish. At dawn, both part better for the other's existence. The monster knows now there is a line. The hunter knows now there is a mind. The day I left the chapel, a gentleman walked beside me to the edge of the old graveyard. The frost had come in the night, and all the bramble wore necklaces of glass. He stood there with his hands behind his back, admiring how the first light sets broken things on fire without touching them. "You will tell a story," he said. "Yes," I said. "Make it kind," he suggested. "True first," I answered. "Truth without kindness is a wound that never closes," he said, and turned, and was gone between one heartbeat and the next, if my heart was beating at all. I stood there long enough to feel the sun consider me, long enough to know that the candle in the chapel had guttered and died. In the empty light, the wine stain on the altar looked like a small country on a map that no one visits anymore. In the dust, those careful footprints faced the door and then did not, as if the chapel had inhaled and exhaled something too fine to name. Blood without hunger. That was the phrase rising with the steam of my breath. A promise, perhaps, or a warning, or simply the fact that what you are is less important than how you choose. We build so many laws on the opposite assumption. We call one another monster and mean, I need not understand you to deny you. The higher vampires do not need us at all. That is why it matters when one decides to stay, to drink with care, to live in our cities like a secret passed from friend to friend. Night fell again as I walked. It tends to in stories like these. Somewhere a bell rang, thin and brave. Somewhere a dog sang its simple, honest song. Somewhere a door was barred against a fear that does not live in the night at all, but in the habits we inherit from those who loved us poorly. And somewhere, in a room with dust that refuses to settle, a gentleman chose not to drink. That is where we begin. Sleep now, while the candle is kind and the wind remembers the window's name. In the chapters to come, we will follow their long roads. The day a barber surgeon dug himself from a grave and dried his hair by a stranger's fire. The summer a prince of their kind loved unwisely and set a duchy burning. The old courtesies and older grudges of a people who learned patience before our calendars learn numbers. The lies that do not hurt them and the truths that do. For tonight, take this small mercy. The worst stories are about hunger. This one is about choice. Chapter 2. An Education in Thirst. By the time the vineyards turned their leaves to copper, I had learned enough to stop asking whether higher vampires could be killed and began asking a better question. What makes one live? Not live as in continue. Their continuance is a foregone conclusion, a long ribbon unspooled across centuries. But live as in choose, wake after waking, and decide again to be a certain kind of creature in a world that names you monster before you open your mouth. The lesson had a teacher, and his name was long enough to need both hands, Emil Regis Roelek Terziv Godfroy. He preferred Regis, the way a mountain prefers hill if it helps the traveler keep walking. He did not arrive with thunder. He arrived with soap. I met him in a village that had known too much cotton bandage and not enough clean water. A pox of steel had swept through a month earlier. Bandits wearing the confidence of uniforms, leaving the customary debris, wounds to stitch, ribs to bind, spirits to retie to their bodies. On the square, under a canopy that had once shaded onions, Regis set up a barber surgeon's bench. He shaved, bled, set, poulticed, advised, listened. He distilled spirits in the back, tonic, he said, measured by scent and patience, the steam threading his fingers like silk. If someone noticed he did not eat, they did not say so. If someone noticed the shadows liked him, they were polite about it. He worked with an attention that made silence feel respectful. I watched him re-break a poorly healed wrist, all apology and competence, and the boy whose arm it was cried only once. When it was done, Regis tied the knot with a flourish, then sat back on his heels and smiled like a sunrise under a hat. Pain, he told the boy softly, is a pupil that learns quickly. Don't teach it the wrong lessons. Later, in the low room where he kept the still and the books, he poured me a thimble of something clear and kind to the lungs. I do not drink, he said, and laughed at the expression on my face. Well, not this, not often, not anymore. Anymore, I repeated, as one does when offered a rope into another person's well. He raised his hands, palms out. They were surgeon's hands, clever, clean, lined with old work. I was, he said, a spectacular failure at moderation. Blood is, to my kind, what wine is to yours. Some men take a glass at wintertide and sing a little sweeter. Some wake in a ditch, arm in arm with their ruin. I woke in many ditches. Once, he broke off, smiling at the wall. Once, I woke nowhere at all. You died, I said. I ended, he corrected, in the way a day ends. And then I began again, not as punishment, as consequence. Regis is the parable the taverns never finish. They sing of him because he walked with a witcher, because he stitched poets together and carried a steel-hearted band through war and wine country and worse. And in the singing, they make him simple. But he was not a simple creature. He was a man of abstinence who loved the smell of vintages the way an old sailor loves the sea he swore to leave. He was a physician who knew exactly how a throat yields to teeth and exactly why it should not. He was a higher vampire who chose, each morning, not to be the worst story written about him. Your kind, he told me, teaches its children that desire is destiny, especially when it frightens you. We teach the opposite. Desire is trivia. What you do with it is law. And when the law fails, I asked. He spread his hands again, accepting the splinters of any honest answer. Then we start over. I have been many men. Some I would not trust with a henhouse. Some I would. If I can be both, then I is not a safe word to lean on. He showed me his distillery, a waist-high cathedral of copper and harmless steam. He made spirits for tinctures, spirits for cleaning, spirits to put a soldier to sleep without nightmares. He poured a finger into a cup for me and swirled the rest beneath his nose, just enough to trap a memory and study it. "I miss it," he admitted. "Not the blood, the surrender, the permission to be worse. I miss, too, the lie that you can drink yourself into a truer self." Ha! What a convenient theology. "How long," I asked him, "did you lie to yourself?" "Longer than you've been alive," he said, but he was kind when he said it, as if to assure me that brevity has its own dignity. It is tempting, in the presence of a creature like Regis, to generalize, to stretch his temperance like a cloak over an entire people and call the night warm. This is a mistake. Higher vampires are not a nation. They share neither a king nor a catechism. They share only their refusal to be simple and a talent for surviving our need to make them so. Among their kind, there are the dancers the villagers call bruxae, whose laughter is a wine glass that cracks even as it is raised. There are the shadow walkers, some name katakans, with eyes like lessons children should not have to learn. There are alps, who speak in dream rooms and leave the sheets smelling of snow. There are fladers and ekimaras and other names that move between mouths like a fever, names that scholars pick at with needles and pin, wrong more often than right. The taxonomy is a human hobby. The thing that matters is not what we call them, but which of them looks at a door and remembers it can choose to knock. "Contagion?" I asked Regis one evening as he stirred a pan of sugar with the air of a chemist and a grandmother. "Does a bite make another of you?" He wrinkled his nose. "We are not mushrooms. Your poets adore metaphors that reproduce by accident. Nothing worth being becomes you by mistake." He tapped the spoon twice on the rim. "The itch you call vampirism lives in stories, not blood. And yet people disappear. People always disappear," he said gently. "When they vanish near us, the math is easy. But if something is easy, it is not always true." "You've killed," I said. "Many times," he said, and the sugar stilled under his spoon. "I do not ask forgiveness for the old ones. The man I was then would not understand it. The man I am now would not accept it." He glanced toward the square, where the sick waited for his hands and the well glowed with moon milk. "Would you like your world simpler?" he asked me suddenly. "A catalogue of punishments with numbers to match the sins? A rack of stakes trimmed to height? I would sleep more on such a world, perhaps. I would not wake better." Regis's life among humans was not a disguise. It was a devotion. He remembered our fragility the way a bell remembers Sundays, mindful of what it is for. He joked as a man jokes, to put the room at ease. He argued as a scholar argues, to refine his own thinking. When he grew angry, it was not the anger of a beast. It was the anger of a brother who has seen you set yourself on fire with a candle meant for prayer. Above all, he liked to be useful. When I mentioned a poet with a wound too deep for thread, Regis packed a bag without being asked. When a dryad's child would not wake, he sat all night telling the child the names of trees until the small hand twitched and closed on his finger, as if to claim a better dream. When a soldier panicked at a scar he could not stop seeing, Regis brewed a draught that returned sleep like a polite guest and taught the man how to hum the terror quiet. You will object, if you have read other chronicles. Was he not destroyed in the end by a sorcerer whose cruelty wore genius like a glove? Yes. A mage tore him from the world as one tears a page from a book that is too true and too late to be revised. This is how I know higher vampires can die. Not by sunlight, not by silver, but by an act of will as old as creation, shaped by a hand that knew what it was doing. But I also know this. Even in ending, Regis taught. He taught that immortality is not the right to keep breathing. It is the habit of leaving something that breathes in your place. A joke that refuses to sour. A method written down in a careful hand. A kindness that becomes a road because people keep walking it. If, in other tellings, those glossy tales where bards wear embroidery and duchesses wear forgiveness, Regis returns, patched by time and affection. I do not begrudge the singers their comfort. Truth and mercy quarrel less often than we suppose. The longer I kept his company, the more the old weapons blunted in my head. Steaks turned to spoons. Garlic turned to laughter. Sunlight turned to a choice of hat. The only silver that mattered was the color of a river at dawn. So I sharpened other tools. Questions first. How did the disappearances begin? When did the dog stop barking? Who wanted a cousin out of the way? A debt erased? A fear fed? Then, courtesy. If a higher vampire sits to speak with you, you do not posture. You share the cup if offered. You do not lie. They taste falsehood the way a sommelier tastes cork. You do not flatter. They have watched cities do that until even marble blushed. If you must fight, fight to live long enough to set the terms. Fire will bluster, and sometimes bluster is enough. Steel will scream, and sometimes a scream wakes a village. But it is wisdom, not weapons, that makes a higher vampire hesitate. Show one a mirror, not of glass, but of consequence, and he may lower his hand. Call one by a name he has not yet earned, friend, neighbor, physician, and he may spend the next 100 years making it true, if only to spite the self he despises. Regis liked that thought. Spite as virtue, he said once, eyes bright with a joke he could not resist. I will add it to my catechism. You have a catechism? I have a list, he admitted, of ways not to be the worst man at the table. And does it work? Often enough to justify pen and ink. Not all of them are Regis. There is a story from the south where vines climb higher than reason and the moon prefers certain windows. It is a story about loyalty and rage, about a hunter who had decided, like Regis, that he could live among us, and about the trap that undid him. It ends with bells ringing at the wrong hour, and a city washing its streets for days. If we go there later, be gentle. The worst things I know about higher vampires I learned from the best of them, and the best things I know I learned where the wine spilled. For now, sleep. Think of a barber's bench in a square that forgot how to be afraid. Think of a gentleman reading labels he will not taste. Think of restraint as an art, practiced in a room that smells of alcohol and oranges and old books. Think of a promise that blood is a choice and the night is a neighbor, and that monsters are sometimes only people who have nothing left to refuse. In the next chapter, we will visit their older houses, those salons of quiet conversation where centuries sit with folded hands, and we will listen to the rules they do not write down. Hospitality that binds, vengeance that waits, debts measured in winters, and the small exact word they use for mercy. Chapter 3. The Courtesy of Night. Older than our kings, older than our calendars, there is a law that survives only because it is beautiful. If a door is opened in courtesy, one does not cross it with teeth. They do not write it down. They do not preach it. They keep it the way some families keep a song, quietly, perfectly, always whole. A law not for the frightened, but for the long-lived, who understand that eternity is mostly made of evenings, and evenings are safer when they begin with manners. I learned this in a room where nothing creaked. It was far from any road, the house built with that precise confidence old money enjoys. Stone that refuses ivy, windows that invite starlight but not drafts. Carpets that keep secrets because they have listened so long they remember only the music. The invitation had arrived as some invitations do, without address, without name, folded and placed where my hand was already going to be. It said nothing. It suggested a direction. I have come to trust suggestions more than promises. At the door, a bell that did not ring. At the threshold, a pause that was not about fear but respect. I knocked softly with the knuckles of my left hand, because a witcher once told me that is how you announce you carry patience and not a weapon. "Enter," said a voice, and the room lit itself. There were 5 of them, or 3, or 7. Number is a mortal hobby. They kept to shadows in a way that preserved their dignity rather than my inventory. They sat not as predators sit, but as scholars do, backs easy, hands predisposed to listening. The table between us was low and round and old enough to have decided not to show off its age. Upon it, crystal that preferred to be touched, fruit that preferred to be seen, and a carafe of water the color of moonlight. "Water," said the host with a smile that made any other drink seem temporary. "Our age prefers clarity." I sat. The chair approved. The house did not lean in to hear us. It had learned that conversations become truer when rooms pretend to be deaf. "You know our names," said the one to my right, "and you will not use them." "I know the names people use for you," I said, "and I will not use those either." "At last," murmured someone near the cabinet, "a guest who understands that to name is not always to know." We drank water together the way others drink oaths. It tasted faintly of stone and time. The host, let me call him S, sat with his hands folded like a door politely closed. When he spoke, he did not waste the first sentence. "Hospitality," he said, "is the only magic you will need tonight. The word has lost blood in our mouths. We use it now for inns that remember your coin and forget your face. We hang it at city gates, the way we hang lamps and forget to refill the oil. To them, the word still means what it was built to mean, a binding, not a favor, a covenant that tastes of bread and breathes like a room held at the perfect temperature for thinking. In such rooms, a higher vampire is not a hazard. In such rooms, a human is not prey. Both are guests, which is a rarer, more dangerous, more sacred thing than either alone. Your people, S said gently, make rules to survive one another's appetites. We make courtesies to survive our own patience. And when courtesies are broken, I asked. We remember, said someone in the corner. The way she said it made memory sound heavier than chains. They do not forgive quickly. They cannot. Time makes grudges precise the way it makes handwriting small and perfect. When a courtesy is broken, they do not roar. They do not hunt. They wait. Vengeance, to a long-lived mind, is not fire, but frost. It works while it is quiet and completes itself long after the room has been cleaned. They measure debts in winters, not weeks. When they settle one, it can feel like a change in weather, sudden to us, inevitable to them. Is there a word, I asked, for mercy? S considered. There is a word, he said, for allowing a story to continue when ending it would be easier. We use it rarely. It is expensive. He did not teach me the word. To know a people's word for mercy is to be in danger of asking for it. We spoke of customs then, and I learned the rules they do not write down, because paper is too short-lived for such things. You do not invite a guest to speak of the blood they have drunk, just as you would not ask a widow whether she sleeps on the left side of the bed. You do not point at their shadow and count. You do not correct their history. Their history is not an argument you can win. If you must speak of killers, speak of kings. If you must speak of hunger, speak of winter. And if you must touch a weapon, touch the pommel, not the blade, as an artist touches the frame, not the painting. Your kind confuses prohibition with safety, S said with a smile that forgave the habit. Ours confuses nothing. We prefer agreements to locks. It is a mistake to imagine their older houses as lairs. There were shells, yes, but they did not sag with skulls. There were cabinets, but the curiosities within were not trophies. They were apologies the world had made to them. A chalice from a siege where they chose to fast. A child's wooden horse saved from a fire and kept because mercy needs memory to remain honest. A page of a poem in a hand that has forgotten itself, preserved because beauty is a better religion than fear. There were also in that room maps with no borders, lines that followed currents we do not teach in our schools, migrations of music, roots of epidemics of thought, the slow drift of a family recipe from one end of the continent to another as wars tried and failed to starve it out. Higher vampires track these the way hunters track prints in snow. They are not rulers. They are cartographers of significance. You think we live apart, said the woman by the cabinet, because we find you distasteful. You live apart, I said, because we are noisy. And fragile, she added kindly. It is difficult to be polite to a creature that explodes when afraid. They shared a laugh that did not exclude me. There is a mastery in that. We call it grace when mortals do it. I have no better word when they do. We ate. You blinked there, did you not? You assumed they do not eat. Some do not, some do. Some pretend because guests are made more comfortable by the sight of another mouth occupied. The fruit was cut small and perfect. The bread was the kind whose crust whispers and whose crumb forgives. I swallowed my fear with olive oil and found it sat easily when seasoned with respect. Tell us, S said to me, what your hunters teach. I told them what the schools teach their children. That silver antagonizes the night, that signs can prick the dignity of a creature that believes itself beyond nudges, that decapitation is an argument even the proud cannot answer, that fire is not a weapon so much as persuasion made visible. I told them, too, what the old ones tell the young when they tire of drilling, that some contracts should be lifted by the corner and shaken until the coin falls out and the truth lands on the floor, that a complaint about missing cattle in harvest time is a cousin to a complaint about a jealous neighbor, that when you are paid too much in advance, you are being hired to be stupid. They listened as if I were telling them their own story from a perspective they rarely enjoy. We employ witches, S admitted at last. You employ them as hammers. We prefer them as levels, to show us where the floor tilts. Do you fear them? I asked. We fear boredom, he said. A good hunter is a conversation. Conversation meant something specific in that room. It meant that both parties leave with a revised estimate of themselves. It meant that monster and man are job titles, not species. It meant that hospitality had done its work, the door had not been crossed with teeth, and therefore the night had permitted learning. Why invite me? I asked, when there was nothing left in the carafe but assent. Because we do not like to be imagined, said the woman by the cabinet, and my pen blushed in my pocket. Because, and this came later, sown in me like a seed that only sprouted once I had walked home, stories are also a kind of hospitality. When we tell them with care, we open a door that does not lead to the room we feared. Of course, there are rooms where courtesies are not observed. In cities that drink their own reflection and call it wine, there are salons of night that turn kindness into costume. There are wagers played with the lives of those who do not know the rules and therefore lose before sitting down. There are older houses where the habit of restraint has rotted into pride, and pride has learned to hunt without leaving footprints. In such rooms, a mortal is a mirror, not a guest. I have been in one of those rooms too. The door did not knock back when I knocked. The chandelier hung with crystal that had never seen candle flame. It was there to insist the ceiling deserved jewelry. The host smiled without showing teeth, which is how you know a creature is not interested in speaking, but in rehearsing. We drank something that pretended to be water and tasted faintly of rehearsal as well. Humans, the host said, are young. It was a thesis he enjoyed so much he did not notice it excused nothing. He spread examples on the table like a magician performing a trick with cards that have all the same face. He spoke about our wars as if only we made them. He spoke about our lies as if his kind had not studied ours the way scholars study dead languages to keep their own lies nimble. When I asked a question about hospitality, his eyes fogged with the look people get when they have heard a word and cannot remember where they put it down. When I left that house, my hands shook all the way to the road. Courtesy is a door you can walk through. Condescension is a well with a beautiful rim. If you lean too far admiring it, you fall in, and the thing at the bottom does not need you to drown. It only needs you to tire. A week later, I learned the house had emptied itself. The host had settled a debt no one but he remembered having. The only thing left on the mantel was a map with one line drawn in careful ink from the city to a small town where I knew a barber liked to brew spirits and tie neat knots. Vengeance for the long-lived remains frost. It does its work while you are pointing at the weather. You ask about bruxae and alps and katakans. I cannot teach taxonomy. I can only teach weather. A bruxae laughs and it cuts glass. That is a weather. An alp sits on your chest and speaks a language that uses your breath for ink. That is weather. A katakan watches you mislay your courage on a crowded street and hands you back the shape of it, sharpened. That is weather too. In each case, hospitality changes the forecast. Invite nothing, promise nothing, waste nothing, and the night is likely to return the favor. As for rules, if you must carry them, carry these. Do not provoke what you cannot resolve. Do not flatter what cannot be pleased. Do not hunt what is not hunting. Do not refuse a kindness you can afford. Do not lie unless you are willing to live inside the lie until it becomes a house. And if you are offered water in a room where nothing creaks, drink and let the oldest law do its work. There is one more custom I learned that evening in the house that had memorized silence. When a higher vampire chooses to owe a mortal, the debt is not paid with coin. It is paid with a future you did not know how to buy. A meeting that arrives when you have lost your way to the only door that would have saved you. A letter placed exactly where it must be found before the ink dries on a treaty that would have strangled a city. A physician in a square on a day when the pox is not of the body. A hand placed palm down on a table at the precise second a blade would have made a new orphan. They call this keeping. It is not protection, it is participation. You become to them something worth continuing. Do not misunderstand, S said as he walked me to the door. We keep gardens, not cages. If you insist on burning yourself, we will at most provide clean bandages. And if I wrong you, I asked. He smiled a smile that remembered winters long before my grandparents were adjectives. Then you will have taught us again to be precise. At the threshold, I hesitated, not from fear, from the sense that I was stepping out of a room that had decided to be kinder than the world deserved. Yes, noticed. You will sleep better tonight, he said. Because of hospitality? I asked. Because of clarity, he said. The night is no longer a shape you must fill with your own worst guesses. Outside, the path had decided to be obvious. The moon had decided to be generous. On a fence post, someone had left a lantern unlit, as if to say, you may need this, but not now. When I reached the road, I turned back. The house did not vanish. It did not glow. It behaved itself like a house, which is the finest magic any building can perform. On the way down, I passed a shrine where villagers leave bread for a saint whose name changes with the season but always involves a hand. I left a crumb and a promise. The promise was this: to tell this part of the story first, before the broken rooms, before the bells at the wrong hour, before the wine that turns a city to mourning. To begin, for once, with a courtesy instead of a crime. Sleep now. The night knows you are listening. In the next chapter, we will cross south into vineyards that memorize sunlight and into a friendship that unspooled into rage. A tale of loyalty between two of their kind, one who learned restraint the hard way and one who refused to learn it at all, and the duchy that paid the bill when old grief was offered a knife and told it was a key. Chapter 4. A Lesson Poured in Red. South, where the hills gather wine the way some hands gather prayer, there lies a duchy that pretends the world is kinder than it is. Toussaint is its name, more a vow than a province. Sunlight seems to pause there and taste itself before moving on. Nights compose ballads to their own shadows. Grapes learn patience and reward it with sweetness. If ever there was a place that believed in stories, it is Toussaint. And so it is almost fitting that one of the continent's most dangerous truths walked there wearing the costume of a fairy tale, the Beast of Beauclair. The posters called for a witcher, the old magic of contracts written in ink that smells of grape and fear. Knights had died with ceremony that made mourning easier to recite. Blood had been poured, not spilled. The Duchess made her plea in a voice that trusted chivalry more than iron. And beneath all that music, a more complicated note waited. The Beast, as the city named him, had another name: Dettlaff von der Eretain. He was a higher vampire, which meant he was neither beast nor curse, but a person who had run out of good choices. He had lived long enough to craft a conscience and then mistake it for armor. He loved, And for his kind, love is a solvent. It loosens vows, it unthreads restraint. Dettlaff loved a woman who treated his devotion like a key. She asked him to open a door, and behind it he found a set of instructions spelled in blood. Friends tried to save him from that door. One friend in particular. You know his name already. We have sat with him as he measured sugar and regret. Regis arrived in Toussaint not to lecture, but to listen, because good friends begin there. He believed Dettlaff could step back from the edge the way a man steps back from a cliff once he has seen what the wind does to the ground below. He believed it because he had done it himself. Belief is often the rope we throw at one another across a chasm and pretend is a bridge. Toussaint did what Toussaint does, dressed tragedy in velvet and presented it with a fanfare. Knights rode out under banners bright enough to blind wisdom. Minstrels sharpened rhymes. Courtiers traded guesses for coin. The city called for Geralt of Rivia, because when stories reach the part where nobles bleed, someone always remembers the practical poetry of a witcher. Geralt came. He carried steel and silence. He listened more than he spoke, which is why the truth liked him. Regis stepped from a shadow that meant safety, not threat, and offered the white wolf not a monster, but a man in need of being found before morning made him permanent. Thus began that careful dance. A hunter hired to kill, a friend determined to heal, and a duchy that wanted the word beast to be enough when it was only the first line of an inconvenient hymn. Dettlaff had rules, most of their kind do. He killed cleanly, if killing can ever be called that. He killed at a distance from himself, as if to insist that rage is a message, not a home. He sent warnings the way storm clouds send news of rain. Those warnings bled like vows. They bled on marble. They made the city tremble in its best shoes. But every crimson stroke spelled a single sentence, repeated in a hand that grew more desperate by the day. Give her back. People will forgive almost anything if you give them a villain and a rhyme. They shouted for justice. They sharpened the wrong knives. They imagined a creature who could be boxed in by noon and beaten by garlic. Meanwhile, the only weapons that mattered were patience and the kind of conversation that lets a man say the worst thing about himself and still be heard. Regis tried. He found Dettlaff between heartbeats and met him not with silver, but with memory. He spoke their oldest language, hospitality. He reminded Dettlaff of the law we learned in the last chapter. The door opened in courtesy and not crossed with teeth. He offered water where the world wanted blood. Sometimes that is enough to make a knight change its mind. Sometimes it is not. Because love, when it hunts under a borrowed name, is a poor student. The woman Dettlaff loved did not want rescue. She wanted an ending with a particular shape. She used his devotion like alchemy, transmuting tenderness into a list of tasks, each heavier than the last. Toussaint's painted facades hid a riddle. Who exactly was holding the leash? The duchy preferred to look at the claws. Geralt and Regis looked at the hand beyond them. There is another truth to remember. Higher vampires do not hunger as we do. The blood in their stories is not sustenance, it is punctuation. When Dettlaff killed, it was not to live, but to say what he could not persuade anyone to hear. It was not hunger, it was grammar. Wicked grammar, yes, unforgivable sometimes, but still the syntax of choice and pain, not appetite. That is why the old tools failed. You cannot solve a declaration with a stake. If you prefer your tales tidy, Toussaint will disappoint you. The road through Beauclair forks in three, and every singer chooses the path that flatters their audience. In one ending, mercy argues with justice until the city itself must choose which song to remember. In another, a friendship shatters like lead crystal, and the pieces do what shards always do. Remember the original shape too well to be harmless. In a third, the woman at the center of the web faces not fangs, but the mirror, which is more honest and more cruel. The bards disagree because life disagrees with itself. But beneath the branches, the trunk is the same. Dettlaff was not a beast. He was a long-lived man who made short-sighted oaths. He mistook devotion for destiny and let someone else write his commandments on his heart. When he finally roared, it was not for blood, it was for acknowledgement. I have done as asked. Now, undo my pain. Cities are not good at that kind of reply. Regis's role in every version is constant. He stands between the worst and the next worst thing. He does not defend murder. He does not deny love. He asks a question louder than either. What will be left of us when this is over? He is a physician even then. He looks at the wound and imagines stubbornly the way it might heal without becoming a scar that ruins the limb. There is a night, remembered differently by different witnesses, when the square fills with a light too clean for comfort. A bell rings not for prayer, but for punctuation. The friend calls the friend by his truest name. The hunter stands with both swords lowered, because he knows by now no blade can kill what is at stake. The woman watches and learns the cost of making a man into a tool and calling it love. Toussaint holds its breath and for once does not speak until morning. What is certain? Higher vampires can end one another. What we mortals cannot finish, their will can. They do not do it lightly. They do not do it cleanly. It is not a trick of sunlight or a trinket of silver. It is decision against decision, age against age. It is the oldest argument a people can have with itself. Who are we when we run out of excuses? I will not choose for you which ending to keep. The continent keeps all three because the continent is honest enough to know that justice, mercy, and consequence live in the same house and quarrel over breakfast forever. What I keep is smaller. I keep a memory of Regis alone the next day, sitting at a table that remembered more laughter than most. He pours water he will not drink because ritual is a spine, and some days you need help standing. He writes a name on a scrap and folds it without reading because grief is a private language, and this is his way of speaking it. He packs his instruments, wipes them carefully, lays each blade down with the respect one keeps for hymns. Then he walks into a square where children have already begun to forget how afraid they were, and he shows them a trick with oranges, because the night must also pay for daylight. And the only coin it respects is kindness given when no one has earned it. Toussaint goes on. It is good at that. It repairs, it replants, it rhymes. The vineyards drink what the ground can no longer remember. The Duchess signs decrees. The minstrels choose a version that keeps them invited to better tables. The posters fade on their boards and are replaced by new troubles written in the same hand. And somewhere, beyond the avenues of cypresses, in a room that prefers dusk, a gentleman with careful hands adds another line to a private list. How not to be the worst man at the table, even when the table has changed its shape. We come away from Toussaint with more than rumor and less than certainty. We learn that even in a place built from ceremony, choice remains the only blade that cuts clean. We learn that love can be a door, and also the wind that slams it. We learn that when a city calls something a beast, it is sometimes only asking to call itself innocent. Sleep now. The hills are quiet, the barrels patient, the moon a coin that pays equally for laughter and for silence. In the next chapter, we will leave wine for mirrors, the crimson-haired nocturne who sings lullabies with no warmth in them, the orphanage where mercy puts on a mask, and the polite horror of kindness that has learned to live without conscience. Chapter 5. Mirror Songs and Red Charity. The song sounded like comfort even before you knew the words. That is how the truly old learn to speak with the young, not with grammar, but with tone. The melody rose like warm air over bread, settled like a shawl over small shoulders, and left behind the faintest scent of iron, so faint a mortal ear would call it imagination, and a mortal heart would call it home. Beauclerk has many songs. This one lives behind shutters. She is remembered by the city as a philanthropist, which is an old word for permission. Red hair like a banner that never tears, footsteps that decide how loud they need to be. By daylight, she runs a house for orphans, the kind that transforms pity into ledger entries and ledger entries into praise. Good bread, clean beds, a nurse whose hands never shake, a lullaby that ends before it begins, because the children fall asleep at the first line and never hear the last. At night, the house sings a different hymn. The candles do not gutter. The floors do not complain. The shadows have been taught to behave. And the woman whose charity glows like a plated sun leans close enough to hear a heartbeat and decides with perfect professionalism what the night can afford. Her name is not important here. Names behave badly when pinned to a page that prefers discretion. What matters is the pattern. Mercy without conscience turns to arithmetic. Arithmetic without love learns to count to 1 and then stop. A city that wakes clean and well-fed will forgive almost anything done in its name after dark, especially if the blood dries before dawn and the laundry is handled discreetly. If you want to understand the oldest fear in a child, listen to a lullaby sung by someone who has never needed sleep. The bruxae of the vineyard country are why mirrors have frames. Without a border, a reflection is an invitation. With one, it is simply a conversation. They laugh like crystal under a fingernail. They dance the way a knife dances when the hand that holds it is happy. They are not shy so much as elective. They choose when to be seen, because being seen is a resource like patience or wine. A bruxa's voice can persuade glass it would be more beautiful broken. Her movement can make a crossbow misread distance. The first time a hunter meets one, he learns the lesson that separates children from craftsmen. You cannot cut echo with steel. To fight a bruxa, you break rhythm. Yours, not hers. Step wrong on purpose. Blink slow. Talk. Tell her a story about a crooked song and let the room decide to be square again. Fire helps, but insult sometimes helps more. These are creatures that prefer elegance, and an inelegant fight embarrasses them the way a chipped goblet embarrasses a sommelier. They are not all killers. Some bruxae keep houses the way cats keep gardens, with exact neglect. Some marry and never unlearn the habit of vanishing when a promise turns into offense. Some will sit with you on a low wall behind a tavern at dawn and tell you which vintages the moon prefers. But if you corner one, and men are very good at building corners where doors should be, she will show you how quickly a lullaby can become a siren, and how useless a handsome oath is against a mouth that has learned not to forgive. Bruxae are a mirror with teeth. They do not show you yourself. They show you the shape of what you brought into the room. The Alps do not need rooms. They borrow the architecture of the chest, ribs for rafters, breath for curtains, fear for furniture. They sit on you when you cannot move, and use your own vocabulary to write nightmares on the inside of your skull. They are not quite dream and not quite guest. They are a profession. To be rid of one, you must become rude in your sleep. Learn to snore like weather. Learn the ugly prayers, the ones that ask the body to stop being a cathedral and be a barn for a night. A barn cannot be haunted. It can only be visited by honest animals. An Alp prefers loneliness. A house with 2 sleepers is armor. A house with 3 is a fortress. If you cannot find a friend, make one of the old kind. Ring a bell with a tone that disagrees with sorrow. Hang iron where hands remember it. Leave milk where the local story says it should go. The night respects an audience it cannot see, sometimes more than the one that can scream. Do they drink blood? Sometimes. Do they need it? No. They need the same thing every old creature needs: a role. Deny them glamour, deny them worship, deny them the luxury of being the only story in the house, and they move on like an actor looking for a better stage. The katakans are weather pretending to be a man. A glimpse at the corner of a market, a tilt in the alley nobody else noticed, the feeling that a sentence passed behind you and almost chose your name. If a katakan decides you are worth his attention, it is not because you are edible, it is because you are interesting. The cure for interest is boredom. Become a habit, walk at the same hour, tip the same hat, whistle the same poor tune. The mind that has tasted centuries will leave you for a better book. If you must fight, if there is no door to close, no courtesy to invoke, remember that a katakan can turn a shadow into a witness for the defense. Light is not the solution, contrast is. Fire behind you, not before you. Smoke that lies about edges, a floor that refuses reflections. These are tricks the old witchers write in the margins because the margins are where shame goes when you lose and wisdom when you win. Back to the house with the red-haired him. It is a perfect charity. Children look at her and see tomorrow. Adults look at her and see relief. City fathers look at her and see clean books. The song is medicine even before you sleep. When Geralt walked that corridor once, quiet as a plan that has learned to respect consequences, he did not knock. He did not announce. He let the lullaby choose whether his boots existed. The woman looked up, and her eyes were the precise color of acceptance. She did not deny what she was. She did not apologize. She offered him something better than innocence, direction. Help me, help you, help him. This was the shape of it. The him, in that hour, being an unseen so old he had forgotten how to dislike names. The route to the elder wound ran through her house because night maps better than law. She could guide. She would guide. She expected him to remember which debts are too large to write down. He did remember. That is why the continent lets him keep walking. A choice hangs in that corridor like a lantern that has never needed oil. Some leave the house with a promise of later. Some leave it with a sword that has learned to be honest. Both choices begin from the same fact. The charity is exquisite. The arithmetic is flawless. The song is in tune. And a city that chooses to keep such a song must also choose what happens to its silence. There is a phrase the old ones use when they are trying to be kind and cannot quite manage it. Blood etiquette. It means, among other small embarrassments, taking only what cannot be missed, making sure the hurt never collects evidence, leaving behind a body that tells a story polite enough to publish. It is how a long-lived conscience learns to survive an immortal appetite for efficiency. The opposite of blood etiquette is riot. Riot is hunger pretending to be justice. Riot is grief pretending to be policy. Riot is what a heart does when someone hands it a ledger and says, "The sum is love." Dettlaff chose riot, and the duchy learned that riot can be correct about pain and wrong about everything else. The Lady of Lullabies chooses etiquette, and the duchy learns that etiquette can be wrong about pain and correct about everything else. Between them stands a barber with clean knives and a witcher with tired eyes. If you ask me which is worse, the riot that names itself love or the etiquette that names itself mercy, I will ask you whether you want to sleep tonight. If you do, keep the question for daylight. The night prefers better company. Once, in a vineyard lane where the dust remembers hooves, I asked Regis why he did not burn the house down. "Because the city wants it," he said, which is the most dangerous reason not to act and the most honest. "Because I can count, and some of those children would not be here without her, because the law you like, hospitality, cuts both ways. She has offered the city a door it can walk through with dignity. The price is written in ink too fine for sunlight." "And the children?" I asked. He looked at me with a physician's refusal to lie, even when lying would make the room breathe easier. "I am here for them," he said. "How?"
"By staying," he answered, "until I am no longer needed, which is the only reason to stay anywhere." That night he told a different song in the square outside the house. Not a lullaby, a catalogue, things to notice, things to ask, things to carry. He taught the children to clap on the offbeat, because a life that claps on the offbeat recognizes when a melody tries to trick it. He taught them a foolish little rhyme about washing ears and not just hands, because ears that are clean hear the lie under the polished kindness. He taught them to name 3 friends before they slept, because a child who can do that survived the kind of night that eats names. A woman in a window watched. She was beautiful the way efficiency is beautiful. She smiled the way a ledger smiles when a column finally balances. Regis looked up and removed his hat. Hospitality is a blade that cuts both ways and leaves both halves useful. You will want rules. We have come this far without giving you any that shine in the dark, like coins dropped by a generous God. Here, then, are rules that are not weapons, and therefore do not rust. If the night gives you a song, ask who taught it to sing. If a house is perfect, look for the ledger. If a kindness never asks you to tell the truth, it is not kindness. If a hunter arrives with both swords low, stand behind him, he has learned something expensive. If a physician says stay, make space on the bench. Staying is how miracles learn your name. And if you meet a higher vampire who offers direction instead of denial, do not mistake it for innocence. It is the older mercy, to point with a steady hand and let you keep your soul while you pay the price you would rather share. The city will keep its song. Cities are very good at curating their own illusions. The orphanage will close one day, but not because of what it is, because of what it has completed. The beds will be sold, the lamps will be moved to a hallway that smells less of starch. The woman with red hair will be remembered in glass. The lullaby will become a street name. Children will grow and tell their children that they were lucky, and they will not be wrong.
Meanwhile, somewhere, not far and not near, a gentleman mends a strap, counts the bottles, and writes a line for himself to practice tomorrow. Do not abandon a town to a song. You have not taught it to question. He will not be there forever. None of us are. But while he is, the arithmetic is interrupted just enough to let something else happen. Choice. Sleep now. The song is quiet. It has learned manners for an hour. In the next chapter, we will take the long road back to hunters and truce makers, the contracts that were really confessions, the villages that lied to save themselves from their own heroes, the unseen who keeps accounts in winters, and the only duel higher vampires fight that makes them afraid. A wager with time, where the ante is tenderness. Chapter 6. Hunters, Truces, and the Unseen Ledger. The board outside the alderman's hall was honest wood and dishonest ink. "Vampire in the fields," the notice cried. "Reward generous." It smelled of fear and fermented apples. All harvest notices smelled the same. Witchers will tell you a secret. Most contracts are not hunts. They are confessions, written in someone else's handwriting. A flock of sheep vanished, and the village remembered an old song about fangs. No one remembered the new taxes or the miller's nephew with a taste for cards. A girl went missing on the edge of a festival, and the crowd decided the night did it. No one dared say the judge's boy had been seen with his hand around her wrist at dusk. Blame is a torch, bright, easy to carry, careless of what else it burns. So the Witcher arrives, and with him the only magic that matters on a bad day: method. He kneels in mud and listens to flies. He measures a step where panic would sprint. He reads the grammar of broken grass, checks that the story the wind tells agrees with the story the blood tells. And when he says, "Not a vampire," it is the first kindness anyone has offered the night in weeks. But sometimes it is a higher vampire, and then the job is not to kill, it is to set terms. The village in Kedweni uplands had already started hammering stakes when the Witcher rode in. The stakes were theatrical, the sort you see in ballads. Too straight, too many, too proud of themselves to do real work. Their fear had a rhythm, and fear with a rhythm is almost impossible to interrupt with words. He did not waste words. He walked the fields until the pattern quit pretending to be random. The sheep had not been torn. They had been arranged. Blood was missing in a way that made sense to storytellers, not to ravens. The footprints were careful. The fences respected. One ewe lay with her head turned as if listening. The Witcher asked for 3 names: the last man to owe the reeve money, the last traveler to pass at moonrise, and the last child to sing about monsters. The same name sat under all 3 questions, like a stone at the bottom of a well: the reeve himself. He had staged a panic to keep a debt from ripening into scandal. He had hoped the village would purchase its own silence with a monster-slaying spectacle. There was a higher vampire, but he had not touched the sheep. He had been passing through and, smelling trouble, had left quickly because courtesy forbids making a frightened room worse. Terms were set anyway. The Witcher wrote them on the back of the contract with the same ink that had shouted for blood. We, being those who fear at dusk, agree not to shout a name we cannot prove. We, being those who pass at dusk, agree to announce ourselves if we must pass again. We will leave the well lid propped a finger high when the night means courtesy. We will shut it when the night means riot. We will pay the reeve's debt in gossip, not coin. The reeve left that winter. The sheep forgot first, as is their custom. The village forgot last, as is theirs. Another place, not far enough from any road for comfort, a mill beside a black creek, a bruxae singing to the water because the water was the only audience that did not interrupt.
A young guardsman had died there, cleanly and without ceremony. His mother's grief made an army of the town, and they came waving prayers like spears. The Witcher found the bruxae seated, hands folded as if waiting in a physician's hall. She did not run. She did not threaten. She only asked the one question that matters when a mob is at your door. Will you let me speak? Were you hungry? The Witcher asked. I do not eat boys, she said, with the simple authority of a rule learned young and never broken. Then who? He asked. The creek, she said, not metaphorically. She showed him where the bank had given way, and the mud had told a truer story than any speech could survive. The boy had slipped. A friend had panicked. The friend had slipped away from the truth afterward, and let the bruxae carry it in his place. The Witcher made a truce where the mill could hear it. The town apologized in the only language crowds trust. Bread left at dawn for 3 mornings, and no one watching to see if it was taken. The bruxae accepted in hers. She sang a new song to the creek that taught the bank how to hold. And 3 springs later, the miller's daughter fell and did not drown, because an old law had been taught to stick. If you insist on a bestiary entry, here is the only one that matters. Higher vampires answer to their own kind, or to nothing. We can bargain, we can wound, we can, once in a while, end what decides to be ended. But the axis they spin on does not lie in our sky. At the far end of a system of caverns older than our superstitions about caverns, there is a room that does not collect dust. The stalactites have learned patience from a mind that never hurries. Water moves where permitted. Silence is the host. Here lives a presence we call, with the clumsy reverence of frightened taxonomists, the unseen elder. He is not a king. Higher vampires do not do kings. Crowns confuse the truth of time. He is gravity. He is winter. When one of their kind forgets the law about doors and teeth, he remembers it for them. He does not speak often. When he does, it feels less like sound and more like the room has decided to explain itself. I have not stood there. I am too fond of hearing my own heart to visit a place that might decide for me whether it should continue. But men I trust have walked in, and one walked out, and what he told me was plain. There are accounts kept there, and the ink is season. Accounts. Who owes restraint to whom? Which courtesy has been broken, and how long the frost must work before a reply is finished? Which of the long-lived have taken to playing at kings and therefore must be sent a winter to teach them not to garden in another people's spring? The unseen elder does not hunger. He counts. When a riot like Dettlaff's shakes a place that thought it had walls against such weather, the unseen does not rage. He subtracts. When a charity like the lady with the lullaby tilts toward arithmetic without conscience, he does not scold. He watches. He waits. He knows that a ledger will always reconcile itself if you let enough winters look at it. Some go to him for permission. They come back with perspective instead, which is ruder and more useful. Some go to ask for death. They return with a task. It is not the task they wanted. That is how you know it is a task worth doing. If you must speak of fear, higher vampires fear him because he remembers the first courtesy. Not the cup, not the roof, the one written into the marrow of anything old that wants to remain itself. Do not mistake your power for your permission. We come back, as we always must, to witchers and truce makers. A contract pinned to a door calls for a killer. A witcher who survives long enough becomes a mediator who has learned 4 languages: steal, sign, silence, and terms. Steal is for last resort and poor planning. Signs are for convincing the room to listen. Silence is for letting a lie run out of breath. Terms are for afterwards, when truth and fear must live on the same street. Here are terms I have seen hold. For a bruxae and a village, market before noon, hunt after moonrise, never the same lane 2 nights in a row. A lantern left on the steps when a song is needed. A window left shut when it is not. No child sleeping alone where the creek has a memory for grief. For an alp and a garrison, barracks rotated, beds shared in pairs, bells hung from cots, a prayer learned not for heaven's ears, but for the body's. And men taught at last the humility of asking to be watched over without shame. For a katakan and a market town, mirrors framed, alleys whitewashed once a month, taxes collected at noon and never at dusk, and the statue in the square turned, not toward the road which flatters travelers, but toward the well which flatters continuance. For the human part of the bargain, no heroics at harvest. Fear wants parades, courtesy wants calendars. None of this is poetry. It is plumbing. It keeps the roof from leaking into the bread. Most of the peace we enjoy is made of such ugly, necessary crafts. Why, a blacksmith once asked me, do you take their side? I take the side of not lying to myself, I said, and the side of solutions that outlast the song. He snorted. And when they kill? Then we draw a line that even long-lived things respect, I said. But we draw it where the killing happened, not where our habits prefer. Steel has its place. I have seen blades do the mercy argument cannot reach. I have watched a witcher step between a boy and his first murder and pay with blood he could afford, so the boy would not pay with innocence he could not replace. I have watched a higher vampire step between a mob and its favorite sin and take a stone to the temple rather than let a lie learn to call itself justice. That is truce-making too. It is not written on boards. It is written on scars. You asked once, what duel higher vampires fear? Not steel against sinew, not sunlight against shadow, time against tenderness. They can live through us. They cannot live with us without learning loss in a way that makes riot look almost merciful. A higher vampire who decides to love, truly love, not collect, makes a wager that the long ache of outliving what you cherish will not turn you to arithmetic or to rage. I knew one who kept a vineyard's books for 60 years and never once took more than the smell of crushed skins at dusk. He taught the family how to taste rain in the grape and hail in the leaf, He buried 2 generations with his hat in hand and did not weep, because sometimes tears are a trespass. When the 3rd asked him to be godfather, he left a letter instead of a yes. It said, "I am not made for your endings." He moved 3 valleys over and learned very slowly to be a stranger who was glad from a distance. I knew another who decided to stay. He learned cribbage from a widow who called him Sir, even after the 5th winter taught him to prefer his first name. He fixed a fence, then another, then the way the town told its own story about itself. He stood in the door when a soldier came drunk with the wrong kind of victory. He was there when the widow died, and the scream he did not let out shook a tree bare out of season. He did not riot. He did not turn to arithmetic. He went to the unseen. He came back with a task he refused to describe, and a face that had remembered how to be kind, even when no one was watching. The town still tells a story about a wind that saved a girl from falling. It has chosen not to learn a truer name. This is the duel, the long-lived heart versus the short-lived joy. Tenderness always loses, and that is how you know it was the right side to fight on. What remains after the loss is the measure of the person, human or otherwise. In the ledger the unseen keeps, there are columns for things we do not put in our books. Times a promise was honored when it no longer made sense. Times a door was opened to a creature that had earned only suspicion and left with something worth more than trust. Times a hunter put his swords down because the truth had put its hands up. If there is interest on such acts, it is paid in seasons of quiet market squares and harvests that do not teach the wrong lessons. If you have read this far, looking for a weapon, perhaps you have found one. It is not iron, it is not fire. It is exactness, exact naming, exact terms, exact mercy, exact consequence. A higher vampire lives very well on the imprecise, on our eagerness to hoist a ready-made sin onto the first shadow that will carry it. Refuse imprecision, and you starve the night of its easiest meals. And if you need a prayer, people always do. Try this one, which has never failed me in rooms I did not understand. May the door I open be the right door. May the word I choose be the smaller of 2 harms. May the story I tell leave no one unable to return. May I remember which debts are paid in winters. May I sleep when sleep is kind, and watch when watching is the only honest work. Sleep now. The boards outside the alderman's hall have been cleared for morning notices. Someone will pin up a demand the night admit what it has done. Someone else will tack up an apology the day will never read. In our final chapter, we will reckon with what remains, the myths we refuse to bury, the courtesies that outlived their makers, and the last best definition of a monster I have ever heard, offered by a barber with clean hands and a vampire's patience. At the end of any long night, there are 3 kinds of silence. The first silence is simple. The world is tired and breathes softly. You hear it when taverns shut their eyes, and horses stand with one hind hoof lightly touching the ground, drowsy as saints. It is the silence that lets bread rise, and wounds knit, and children dream themselves taller.
The second silence is suspicious. Something has been removed, a rumor, a danger, a man. The room still looks the same. The chairs still know your name. But there is a gap where a voice should be, and the gap has teeth. We call this peace because we are grateful for the reprieve. The older creatures call it debt. The third silence is earned. It shows up after a decision that could have been loud, after vengeance that did not rehearse itself in public, after mercy that refused applause. It is the quiet of a roof that does not leak, though the rain makes a good argument for it. When you hear that silence, you can sleep. When you do not, you learn to tell stories to keep yourself from mistaking the other two for it. This book has been an attempt at the third silence. The worst thing the old songs did to us was not teaching us to fear the dark. Fear is sometimes a decent tutor. The worst thing was teaching us to simplify it, to put horns on it and be done, to raise a stake as tall as our relief and hammer it into the first shadow willing to stand still. That habit has kept a great many carpenters in work, and a great many fathers from noticing their sons limping home with lies in their pockets.
Higher vampires are not what the songs swear. They walk at noon when it pleases them. They speak softly when the room deserves it. They do not drink our blood because they must. Blood to them is want, not need. They live on decisions, on courtesies, on the long, stubborn grammar of restraint. They fail as we do, but their failures echo longer because their rooms have more years in them. If you insist on a single correction you can keep in your pocket, keep this. Treating a want like a need is how monsters are made, our kind or theirs. A thirst is a sentence, not a verdict. You can end a sentence with a period, or you can turn it into a question and see who you are when you answer. I have sat where the older houses keep their maps of weather and music. I have watched hospitality do its slow magic, turning teeth to conversation and conversation to clarity. I have stood under the chandelier that wore crystal like arguments and realized that condescension is a well with a beautiful rim. If you lean too far admiring it, you fall. I have walked streets where charity sang with red hair and ledgers for eyes and seen how mercy without conscience counts the living with the same pen it uses for the dead. I have watched a duchy dress sorrow in velvet and call it a beast when the beast was only the geometry of a man's devotion bent to someone else's plan. I have known a barber who failed at moderation with such catastrophic elegance that the gods should have hired him to design thunderstorms. Regis taught me that immortality is not the right to keep breathing. It is the habit of leaving behind instructions for how to breathe better. He taught me to keep water for guests and jokes for children and clean blades for the hour when arguments stop answering the door. He taught me the bars of a catechism, how not to be the worst man at the table. And when the world insisted on killing him for being more honest than it knew how to endure, he taught me one last thing, that endings are only where kindness changes shape. I have not stood before the unseen elder, and I do not recommend you try. It is unhealthy to meet gravity socially, but I have felt the frost traveling from his accounts into the cities that needed winter more than sermons. I have seen riot subtract itself under his gaze. I have seen arithmetic grow ashamed. He keeps ledgers in seasons. He reminds the long-lived of the first law. Do not mistake your power for your permission. Had we a fraction of his patience, our courts would be quieter and our streets less eager to make history bleed. And then there is The Witcher, the practical poem the continent writes to itself whenever it needs to stop pretending. The board asks for a killer. Time replies with a mediator carrying 4 languages: steel, sign, silence, and terms. Steel for last resort, sign to persuade a room to behave, silence to let the lie wind itself out, terms to keep a village and a nocturne from ruining each other's habits. Most of the peace we enjoy is made of such ugly crafts. They do not rhyme, they hold. What remains when the posters come down and the bells forget why they were ringing? A square where children clap on the offbeat because a gentleman taught them that rhythm is a kind of armor. A mill that does not swallow the miller's daughter because a bruxae taught the creek to hold. A barracks where men sleep 2 to a cot and learn to be unashamed of guarding one another from alps. A market that frames its mirrors because katakans respect borders even when reflections forget them. A village that leaves its well lid propped a finger high when the night means courtesy and shuts it when the night means riot. These are small things. Small things are what survive. We want heroics at harvest time. We want parades to excuse us from doing the repair quietly and with clean hands. The long-lived do not enjoy our parades. They prefer our schedules. They prefer roofs that do not leak, lanes that do not invite accidents to memorize, and treaties that know truth is expensive and therefore worth paying for in winters, not weeks. If you must choose a side, and you must, neutrality is just a slow yes to the loudest speaker. Take the side of exactness, exact naming, exact consequence, exact mercy. A higher vampire lives very well on our imprecision. Our habit of hurling monster at the first shape that will carry our fear keeps them fed without lifting a finger. Refuse imprecision, and you starve the easiest appetites of the night. Once, on a road that tasted of iron filings and rain, I asked the barber to define a word we throw like a stone when we are tired of thinking. What, I asked, is a monster? He cleaned his hands as if the answer required it. Then he said, "A monster is anyone, man, beast, vampire, saint, who makes other people unreturnable." He saw my confusion and spared me a lecture. To be unreturnable, he said, is to be used in such a way that you cannot go back to your life. Perhaps you are dead in the usual sense. Perhaps you are alive and branded with a fear that rewrites your seasons. Perhaps you have been turned into an example, which is a very efficient kind of death. The world is full of accidents that do this. A monster chooses to. He laughed softly, as a physician laughs when he knows the medicine will taste foul and will work anyway. By that measure, he added, I have been a monster. I try not to be anymore. The trying is the only honest work I know.
It is a definition that has never failed me. It puts steel in the right hands and mercy in the others. It lets a witcher refuse a contract because the village's fear wanted a bonfire more than a solution. It lets a duchess see her city's songs for what they are, lullabies that must be answered with laws and bread, not legends. It lets the old houses keep their water cold and their knives clean. It lets the unseen close a book without a speech. It also lets you look in the mirror. If the story you tell about your enemies leaves them unreturnable, if you have fed on them to the point where the only path they can take is the one you have fenced for them with your fear, then you are not hunting monsters. You are manufacturing them. We have spoken of truce as if it were a table you set once and then dine at forever. It is not. Truce is breakfast, humble, repetitive, sometimes burned, essential. It is a lantern wick trimmed every evening. It is a courtesy renewed, not because anyone deserves it, but because without it the house learns to speak only in screams. We have spoken of tenderness as the only duel higher vampires fear. This is still true. Time always wins. It chews through vows and dresses and cities and names. But if you want to humble time, you do not attack it. You befriend it. You keep promises longer than the fear that demanded them. You carry habits past the season of applause. You choose 100 times to be better than the easiest version of yourself. This is how the long-lived learn to live with us. It is also how we learn to live with ourselves. We have spoken of choice as the difference between hunger and grammar. Hold to that. When you hear of blood in the street, ask, who wanted a poem and who wanted a meal? When you hear of a monster in the fields, ask, which debt is being paid in a currency the village does not admit to owning? When you hear of a charity with perfect sheets, ask, what happens to the stains that do not wash out of the soul? Questions are weapons that do not rust. Now, the promises I have left you along the way. The candle, not to frighten you, but to teach you what a small light does to a big room when the room has learned manners. The coin, so that you would remember that hospitality is a covenant, not a garnish. The water, because old houses keep it cold and new guests forget to ask. The map without borders, so that you would learn to track migrations of kindness. The prayer, 5 lines short enough to fit in your mouth when your hands are busy saving someone who will never know your name. Let me repeat that prayer, not as a flourish but as a tool you may yet need. May the door I open be the right door. May the word I choose be the smaller of 2 harms. May the story I tell leave no one unable to return. May I remember which debts are paid in winters. May I sleep when sleep is kind, and watch when watching is the only honest work. If you cannot keep the whole, keep the 3rd line. It is the shape of righteousness that does not devour what it came to defend. Somewhere far north of your pillow, a barber finishes tying a bandage with a flourish he reserves for children who need to believe knots are magic.
He writes a name on a scrap and does not read it. He sets a kettle on and forgets it in favor of a joke. He tries, as he has tried every morning since, to be less of a monster than yesterday. He fails sometimes. He begins again. He is very old. Beginning again is the only immortality that counts. Somewhere far south, a duchy's vineyards drink the day's last color. A song practices itself in a window, and finding the phrasing too neat for what the night deserves, chooses silence instead. The square keeps both endings of an old story because the square is honest enough to know they are all true to the people who lived them. Somewhere below ground, a presence turns a page, and winter moves a finger-width closer to a city that has confused etiquette with virtue. It will arrive without fanfare. That is how debts get paid. Somewhere between, a witcher declines a hero's welcome because he has been paid to set terms, not to star in parades. He points at a poster and asks the alderman to erase one word and write another. Beast to problem. The town resents him for the demotion and then sleeps better than it has in a season. And here, where your breathing has shortened and the pages grow heavy in your hand, the night earns its third silence. Not simple, not suspicious, earned. Sleep now. If a door opens, let it be the right one. If a song begins, let it be the one that ends with you safely returned to yourself. If the dark asks you what you believe, answer carefully and with good manners. Remember that the worst stories are about hunger. This one was about choice.